Today, we're going to build the perfect PC. Okay, fine, I know there's no such thing as the perfect PC. Let's not get hung up on that. What we're going to build is a system that might be perfect for a whole lot of people. Let me explain what I mean. This is a system that's going to allow you to stay productive, work from home, do everything that you need to do. It's going to stay quiet, it's going to stay cool, but it's also going to let you get your game on when all the work is done. It's not going to break the bank, it's going to be easy to build, it's going to be easy to maintain, it's going to be very reliable, and it's going to be easy to upgrade in the future. Does that sound like a tall order? Maybe, but I'm pretty sure we can do it. Let's check it out. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the components that I chose and why I chose them and why I think they work well together for this kind of thing. Now, along the way, if you have a better idea or disagree with any of my choices, then let me know in the comments. Like or dislike this video, and if you're into this kind of thing, please subscribe so you can see more. But let's start with the case. This is the Fractal Design Meshify C Mini, micro ATX form factor case, but it's not super small, so it should be pretty easy to build in. Cable management should be easy enough. It's got a mesh front, really good airflow, comes with 2 high-quality fans, and since this is an entirely air-cooled system, all of that makes this a really good deal. Okay, so I know a lot of you care most about this right here, and that's the GPU we're using in this system. Clearly, I went with the Sapphire Pulse 5600 XT, and you might be wondering why. I set out to buy a 2060 KO from EVGA. However, at the time when I was purchasing all the components for this build, which by the way are all coming out of my own pocket, I couldn't buy a 2060 KO, at least not for the $299 that they're supposed to cost. I was able to buy a 2060 KO Ultra, which is the exact same card with a very slight overclock that quite frankly I'm sure I could have gotten out of a regular one anyway for $0 additional dollars. And then I started looking around at what my other options were, and I came across this, and I started learning more about this card, and I decided that it was perfect for what I was trying to do. So first of all, being an air-cooled system, I want something that's going to be quiet. That's usually one of the advantages that I enjoy about a water-cooled system, but it is possible to get a very quiet air-cooled system too. Now, this card is very interesting because it has one of the fastest stock overclocks of any of the 5600 XTs, yet has a very low fan speed. In fact, I think the fans normally don't spin over 1,000 RPM, so it stays very, very quiet, yet it has the cooler. My understanding is that it's the same cooler from the 5700 XT, and it works very, very well. So you've got a very good performing 5600 XT that stays very quiet, stays cool, and fits the requirements of this build perfectly, all for 280 bucks. This was like 10 bucks off on Newegg. So in the end, I got a card that was less expensive, performs very, very similarly to a 2060 KO, and is going to stay very quiet. So this absolutely fits the bill, and I think that it's actually perfect for what we're putting together today. The processor I'm going to use is a Ryzen 5 3600, which is considered by many to be about the best bang for the buck processor you can buy right now. It performs very well. It's 6 cores, 12 threads. It'll get the job done, no problem, and comes with a very respectable stock cooler. So I am going to cheat just a little bit. I happen to have, from a previous build, an AMD Wraith Prism cooler. It performs a little bit better than the stock cooler that comes with this 3600, but the stock cooler with a 3600 is totally fine. So don't even worry about it if you don't want to spend any additional money. The motherboard we're going to use today is an MSI B450M. To fit the case, this is micro ATX, and it's got some pretty nice features. Even though it's not a super expensive motherboard, it's certainly got everything we need. So for storage and RAM, nothing too exotic. Samsung 860 EVO SSD. This is the 1 terabyte. You really can't go wrong with this. You can certainly get SSDs for a bit less than this one. That's no problem at all. A lot of them are very good. Just do your homework before you buy one. I want maximum reliability, so I went with one of these. The RAM is super straightforward, 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz Crucial Ballistics. No RGB or anything, just standard black RAM. Don't need this thing to be too flashy. So I think we should take a moment to talk about the rainbow-colored elephant in the room, and that's RGB lighting. Now, whether you love it or hate it, I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. One of the big objections that a lot of people legitimately have is that the software that sometimes is required to manage it can bog your system down and even open it up to security vulnerabilities. So I think there's a very happy compromise. In a case like this, no pun intended, a minimal amount of RGB I think looks better than a whole lot of RGB. These are some dark flash fans. They're cheap, and they come with their own controller and remote, so you don't need any additional software. I think they're going to look pretty classy in a system like this. So a lot of people might tell you that the first step to building a PC is to put the CPU in the motherboard. I'm going to go ahead and disagree and say putting the I/O shield in the case is the first step. If you forget to do this at the beginning, you are going to be hurting for certain at the end. Okay, so now that the I/O shield is in the case, now we can put the CPU in the motherboard. With AMD, you've got the pins sticking out of the chip itself, and then a bunch of little holes in the socket here. And we just have to make sure we line them up the right way. So on an AMD socket like this, you'll notice that one of the corners is a little different than the others. It's got actually a little tiny triangle on it, and it looks like a couple of the pins are missing. Now, on the chip itself, you'll also notice that one of the corners is a little different, and it has a little golden triangle on it. You just have to make sure you line those up, and you'll have no problems at all. Okay, so all we need to do is lift up this bar. You'll notice that the socket slides to the side very slightly. When the pins line up, it just drops right down, falls flat. And then we push this down, and it's actually held fairly securely in place. Now, the cooler is just going to clip right down on top of this, but first we have to apply some thermal paste. Okay, so the thermal paste I'm going to use is Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. This is very popular stuff, for good reason. It's thermally conductive, but not electrically conductive. It works very well, and it lasts a really long time. In fact, it's quite likely that this will last longer than the useful lifespan of this entire system. So once I put it on, I can forget about it until it's time to upgrade. So some people get really triggered when they see others apply thermal paste, so I'm just going to do it in the simple, classic pea-sized blob way. You just put a pea-sized blob right in the middle. This stuff is gooey. Okay, so as soon as I moved the motherboard back over here, I realized that I actually put a little too much thermal paste on the chip. And then I looked at the bottom of the cooler that I was about to put on, and I noticed the grooves along the sides of the heat pipes. So I decided to do a slightly alternative version of thermal paste application, and that's called the spread method. And what you do is you take a little spatula like this. This one's angled, so I find it's a little easier to use. And you just take that little tiny glob of thermal paste and you spread it evenly over the entire surface of the chip. This makes sure you get full coverage, but you have to be careful that you don't wind up putting too much on. With a lot of CPU coolers, you're going to wind up squeezing any excess out over the side, but you know, it's a mess. It doesn't help anything and it's wasteful, so really just try to use the absolute minimum. This may look opaque and it may look like there's a lot on there. That is an incredibly thin layer of thermal paste though. So this should give me really good contact with the cooler and maybe help make up for some of the lost space in those little grooves there. So AMD coolers, super easy to put on. There are two brackets on either side of the chip attached to the motherboard. You don't have to add any mounting hardware to the motherboard itself. And then those hooks just go right on the clamps on the side of the cooler. You pull a lever on the side, like so, and that's it. It clamps right down, it's nice and secure, and that's all there is to it. Let me show you how it's done. Okay, so click one on that side. Click one on that side. Okay, so now we have both clamps on either hooks. Now we're just going to pull this lever, and it tightens right down. And that's it. That's nice and tight, nice and secure. Okay, so this guy right here, this goes on the CPU fan connector. It might be on a slightly different spot on your motherboard, so just check the manual. On this one, it's right here. And then once this is all hooked up, I'll do something a little more discreet with this cable. Okay, so here's the RAM. Now, like all RAM, these sticks are keyed, so they only go in one way. Just remember to open up the brackets before you pop them in. Ooh, that is pretty snug. One. And two. Okay, so look at how much we've accomplished already. We've got the CPU in the motherboard, the RAM's in the motherboard. Now all we have to do is get the motherboard in the case, plug some stuff in, pop in the graphics card, and we're practically done. How easy is that? Okay, so now we're going to pop the motherboard into the case, and all you do is make sure all this stuff lines up with that I/O shield that you remember to put in. Very first thing, because it's the first thing you always do. All right, so just line everything up, slide it right in. And there you go, just like that. Okay, look at this mess. Now that the motherboard is secure in the case, now we have to connect the front panel. So this is for the USB jacks that go on the top of the case, and they're just USB 3.0. There's no regular USB, which is becoming more and more common. So that's a really easy thing to plug in. This is the HD audio plug, which is not HD anything. It's just the stereo jack and the microphone jack. And then these are for, the power switch, the little blinky lights and stuff like that. So this is, for some people, the hardest part of the whole thing. Some motherboard manufacturers will actually give you a little key that lets you plug these into something ahead of time and then plug that onto the motherboard, which can make it a little simpler, but it's not that hard. Okay, so I hope you can see this okay. I've plugged in my USB 3.0 cable there. Just on an odd side note, that cable is somehow a little too short, and I almost couldn't make it reach the USB 3 port. There's actually another little hole over here I would have much rather fed the cable through, but it's literally not long enough to do it, so I had to run it through the other way. Now it's just black, it's not going to stand out, not a big deal, but I just thought it was odd that that cable, compared to the egregious extra length on these other front panel cables, they're just so different. So the front panel connectors are all right here, and there is actually a map for what those pins do printed right on this motherboard, and a lot of other motherboards are going to be the same way. Okay, so now for the fun part. It's super easy, but I always enjoy it. This is where we put the GPU in. Just like the RAM, you press this little bracket back on the PCIe slot, and you just slide this sucker right in. It's keyed, it only goes in one way, and you just push it down until it clicks. Boom, just like that. You replace a couple of screws right there, and that's it. Now the only other thing you have to do with the GPU is just attach the power cable to it, but we're going to be using a cable extension for that anyway. Well, this is looking pretty cool. Okay, so here's the power supply for our system. This is the EVGA 650G5 Gold Plus modular power supply. There's a lot of words there, but let me just tell you what it means. This can produce up to 650 watts for our system. At the correct voltages, it's a good quality, efficient power supply. Efficiency just means it's not wasting electricity by turning it into heat and letting it escape out into the world. Modular just means that it's only using the cables that you need to use, so you can just add and subtract them as needed. And I happen to like EVGA power supplies. They're not the only maker of quality power supplies, but whatever you choose, use a good power supply for your system. A problem with this can create problems everywhere. So don't skimp. They're not that expensive. I know it can be tempting when you're trying to make every penny count while you're building something to try to save a few bucks here, but just don't overdo it. Make sure you get something that's good quality. You don't have to get a gold rated efficiency power supply, just get a good quality one. That's some very, very well spent money. Okay, so here we have an Antec cable extension. And literally all these do is snap onto the cables that go into your power supply. And these are the visible parts of the cable that you will see in your system. And they just look nicer. They cost like 30 bucks. It's not the kind of thing you'd want to spend over an extra 30 bucks on your power supply if you're having a hard time, budgeting a good quality power supply. But, if you've got 30 bucks that you can add and you want to make your system look good, then just go for it. They're not going to impact performance. They're nothing to install. They literally just snap right on the cables, and then that's it. Extension cables. That's simple. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly show you why I always attach the power cables to my power supply before I put everything together. This power supply slides right in the back like that. There's a bracket that will lock it into place. And once it's in there, there is a gap here between the tray that holds the hard drives like the SSD and will be helpful for cable management, but it'd be really, really hard to attach all of these cables once that was already in there. That could be a lot of time, a lot of effort, and I bet you a lot of people who might try to do that in a case like this would wind up having to take the power supply out afterwards. So save yourself some time, save yourself some energy, just plug everything in ahead of time and get it all ready to go. And then it's much, much simpler from there to just, get everything where it needs to go. So mounting a hard drive in a system like this is usually really easy. Some people don't mount them at all. They just float around inside the case and it actually works okay. I like to mount them on these little sliding drawers if they're available. Sometimes you can mount them to the interior of the case. There's usually a lot of options. On a drawer like this, there are a bunch of holes in the bottom for different kinds of hard drives. If you put this on here, there are some screw holes on the bottom of the SSD that just line up with some holes in the bottom of the case. There are some screws that usually come with the case that will allow you to just mount that right on there. You screw them in and you pop it in, and then you just connect the SATA power cable to that, and there's always a SATA cable that comes with your motherboard and a SATA input on the motherboard itself, and then that's really it. So it's 2 plugs, 4 screws, and you slide it in, and that's all there is. Okay, well, now's the moment of truth. Everything's plugged in and hooked up the way it should be. Now the question is, will it post? Let's find out. And there we have it. Okay, so before you do anything else, don't accidentally bump into your keyboard and set the language to French. Anyway, the dark flash fans that I got, I put 2 in the front, 1 in the back, and then I took the 2 fans that came with the case and put them on top for exhaust. As you can see, the cooler's lighting up, the graphics card's lighting up. We're going to be setting all of this into some kind of cohesive looking thing. But even just like this, you know, it looks pretty good so far. I think it's going to look a lot better when we're all done with it. So let's get this thing all set up. Boy, I gotta tell you, the feeling never gets old. Every single time I put a system together, it's just an awesome experience. And this wasn't the most complicated or highest end thing I've ever built. That doesn't matter. It was still just a lot of fun. And if you've never built a PC before, you should try it. I know you can do it. You saw how easy it was to put this one together. And there's a lot of resources like me out on the internet that you can refer to for any help you need along the way. And as you can see, I've got the RGB fans, just a sort of solid blue color, and I more or less matched the AMD CPU cooler to be about the same color. I did wind up using MSI Mystic Light to get that done. The alternative is to use some Cooler Master software, and with this particular cooler, it turns out you actually have to download software from Razer as well, which is exactly the kind of thing I was trying to avoid. So for the fans, we're using the controller that came with the system. For the CPU cooler, we're using MSI Mystic Light. Came with the motherboard. And if I want to change the color of the fans, I just use this remote right here. And I can just cycle through, and it can go through all different colors, different patterns, all kinds of different things. You can get it to look however you want it to look without any extra stuff to bog your system down or impact performance. I also did some basic benchmarking just to make sure the system was working and all the temperatures were staying where they should, and I was pretty impressed with the results. Let me tell you what I found. The first test I ran was Cinebench R20, and with a Ryzen 3600 like this, the score didn't surprise me at all. My high score was 3652, totally fine. I ran it again and again and again, and it always came up right around there. What was interesting, though, is that the high temperature I recorded was 71 degrees, and that's just with a stock AMD air cooler like this. Now, AMD doesn't make coolers. Cooler Master makes this cooler, but it's a good one, and it worked very, very well. So that told me that the CPU was doing just fine. The cooler was doing its job, and it was performing as it should. Next, I needed to see how the GPU was doing, and for that, I used Firestrike. My GPU high score wound up being 7676, and the CPU high score was 7283. But really, you know, it's not like that's going to put me on any top 10 lists. What I was more interested in finding out was how my temperatures were holding up throughout that test. I was very impressed to see that my junction temperature, which is the hottest part of the CPU, hit a peak of 73 degrees just with the stock air cooler that's on there. That's awesome. I've used a 5700 XT that gets into the 90s with a 3-fan cooler. I mean, that's really, really good. It was interesting to see that my peak power draw was 161 watts just for a moment, and that corresponded with the frequency of the card hitting 1751 megahertz, which for the Sapphire card like this is just the out-of-the-box overclock. I didn't do anything. I didn't run any overclocking software at all. I just plugged it in and that's what it was hitting. That's pretty good. So given those temperatures and those frequencies, there's definitely some overclocking headroom on this card. Now, I don't really see any need to do that for, how this system's going to be used, but it's kind of cool to see that it's there. I'm sure that the good airflow in this case helped both of those results. And that was one of the reasons I chose this case. And I will say that even after this is all said and done, I knew this was going to be a good case to build in, but I can say confidently now that this is a good case to build in. I was very happy working with this thing. There is sufficient room for cable management, though given the shroud for the power supply and the hard drives, I thought there'd actually be a little more extra space for cable management, but it's fine. I didn't, even with the cable extensions, I didn't really run into any problems. So at the beginning of this, we set out to build a system that would be ideal for staying productive and being able to get your game on when all the work is done. Well, I think we've absolutely created a system like that. So the kind of gaming you would do on a system like this, for the best experience, I think 1080p would be ideal. For quite a while, you should be able to run even very demanding games at 1080 on a system like this and have no problems at all, and have a very enjoyable experience. I'm sure that it could handle some higher resolutions, but for the best experience, for most people, I think that 1080 would be where it would be at for a system like this, and that's the resolution most people are gaming at anyway. So I want to tell you, I built this system with someone very specific in mind, and that's my son. He's stuck inside right now. He can't go to school because all the schools are shut down, and he's doing all his work online and his projects, and I want to be able to give him a system that allows him to get everything done that he needs to do, have fun doing it, and then be able to play his games and have fun and enjoy his Minecraft and whatever else he wants to play, Bendy and the Ink Machine. And this will certainly do that and cover him for years, I think. And this has absolutely got a lot of love in it when I put it together. And this is for you, buddy. I really hope you enjoy it. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was informative. I hope it was entertaining for you. Again, please hit that like button. If you didn't like what I did, hit the dislike button. Give me something in the comments. Let me know what you thought and what you might like to see next. And please subscribe if you're into this kind of thing. But thanks for watching all the way to the end. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. And we'll see you next time. Okay, so far we've got a case that's got good airflow. We've got some fans. They're going to make it look kind of cool. Now let's talk about the stuff that really matters. Yeah, you.